Okay, hey guys, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about, I'm going to be telling you about the 2020 MLB season and some of the ways that can work with coronavirus going on and just basically the different options for how we can um, maybe see baseball come back in 2020. So first of all, for some background on it, um, as you know, COVID-19 indefinitely postponed all American sports in early mid-March. So on March 16th, uh, which was just a couple days after the NBA became the first league to do it, MLB shut down their operations before the season started, which obviously was a little bit different than the NHL and NBA, who were a couple weeks away from their playoffs. And so when you look at like the ideas of, well, are they going to be able to play at all, or are they maybe going to have to cancel? Obviously, canceling an entire season is a lot different than decision than the NBA or NHL having to cancel the last 2 weeks in the playoffs. Obviously, crowning a champion is like kind of the point of these seasons, but when you look at it from a financial standpoint, at least the NBA and NHL have made some revenue, and baseball would be losing all of their in-season revenue. And so instead, all sports have been postponed. We have seen recently that the PGA and NASCAR are starting to come back because those are individual sports that they can they can play with proper distancing guidelines. And so baseball, basketball, hockey, those are all a little bit different. And so now MLB is going to be looking to answer how can we play a 2020 season, and we're going to talk about that in this presentation. So some history and some information on baseball in general. MLB reported $10.7 billion in revenue last year, and most of that comes during the season from ticket sales, absolutely, but also from TV revenue, ad revenue, people buying jerseys, people at the concession stands. So that means that each month that baseball doesn't play games, they're losing over $1 billion. Basically, the only revenue they get outside of the regular season is, you know, jersey sales, maybe like around the holidays and stuff like that, like gifts and some TV and ad revenue, sure, but not near what they make during the season. So while they're not playing, there are still some savings. They advanced $170 million in player salaries over the first 2 months, and that typically would be a $1.3 billion salary payout. But those savings don't match the losses that they are still taking. And so if they do play a shortened season this year, this wouldn't be the first time baseball's had a shortened season. In 1995, following the players' strike, they came back and played a 144 game season instead of the typical 162. If they did it this year, it would have a completely different reaction from fans than in 95. In 95, fans were livid. They were angry at players and owners alike for perceived greed. The labor dispute then was mostly about revenue share, and everyone was just absolutely infuriated at both sides. And so this is important to remember when we talk about some of the solutions. And so I'm calling these proposals, really these are more like ideas because none of these have gone to votes yet, and they're completely reliant on public health. And I'm recording this on May 9th. It's possible that by the time you watch this, there have been different plans. This is a really fluid situation. But first of all, the Arizona plan was reported April 6th by Jeff Passan with ESPN. And that the idea there was that baseball would play all of their games in the Phoenix, Arizona area without fans. So they would use a combination of Chase Field, which is where the Diamondbacks play, some spring training and minor league facilities, because they don't need to have a large number of seats if there's not going to be fans. And so the key point of this plan would be that players, coaches, umpires, and essential personnel would be sequestered, basically locked in local hotels. They'd only be allowed to travel to and from the ballpark. And so the CDC supports this plan in theory because of the strict isolation and social distancing that would be implemented. Mike Trout, though, and Clayton Kershaw, who are two of the most powerful voices in baseball right now, are both publicly opposed to this plan because they don't want to be kept away from their family for that long, which is a requirement for this plan to work. But that was the kind of the first idea that came out on April 6th. On April 28th, Bob Nightingale with USA Today reported this 3-division plan, which was that MLB would realign geographically for this season. So instead of having 6 divisions, 3 in each league, the American and National League, there'd be 3 10-team divisions. And then there was some different ideas for where those games would be played. There was the idea that the games would be played in Arizona, Texas, and Florida, all 3 of which are states that have started to reopen their economies and things like that. And there was also the speculated potential, and this is what baseball and the players would prefer, is that the games would be played in home stadiums. We'll talk about some of the barriers because obviously that would be tough logistically, but you can see down here what those divisions would look like. And so it could be interesting to see like some proximity rivalries and things like that. But those were the 2 proposals that came out. And then recently, this week, Jeff Passan reported that there was a return to play proposal that was expected to be delivered to the MLBPA, the Major League Baseball Players Association, this week, or within the week. And that would be a mid-June spring training 2.0 kind of, where they would return and start ramping up for the season. And then they'd have opening day in early July. Ken Rosenthal with The Athletic speculated that it could be July 4th. Trevor Plouffe, who's a former baseball player, speculated that it could be July 1st. But part of this proposal would be that the rosters would be expanded from 40 available players to 50 and from 26 active players to 30. And this season would be anywhere from 80 to 100 games. So again, that was reported on May 6th. That's the most recent thing that we've seen. And at the time of recording this video, that has not been presented to the MLBPA, and they have not like voted on it or anything like that. But that's the most recent development. And so now applying some of the things that we've talked about this semester, barriers, benefits, opportunity costs. Obviously, the biggest barrier to this would be the public health situation. That's the whole reason things are shut down, of course. And so the first hurdle that needs to be cleared is that the public health situation needs to have improved enough that doing this is an okay decision. Another potential barrier that Ken Rosenthal talked about in The Athletic is player pay. They've already agreed to prorated wages for a shortened season. So if they play 100 games, their paychecks this year will reflect a 100-game season instead of 162. One thing they have not agreed on yet is whether or not they would reduce player salaries if there's no fans allowed at the stadium. This is something that owners want, but players obviously don't. And some have wondered about not playing due to fear for their safety or for the safety of their families, because players, especially if we're doing the 3-division plan where they're in their hometowns and they can see their family, they're taking on risks not only for their own health but also for that of their family. And so if the player has someone who's more at risk or something like that, could they skip the season without penalty because they don't want to risk harming their loved ones? There's also the question of umpire pay. They've had similar questions as players. They've also had questions about their playoff pay, which is a fixed number, and their per diem questions. So there's a lot of different potential problems there. But I think the important thing to remember is, like I talked about how in 1995 fans were livid with the players and the owners. If the only thing stopping baseball from coming back in 2020 was pay, in a time where a great deal of America is facing financial uncertainty, it would be a complete PR nightmare. And that is the polar opposite of what they want. It would just be like the perception of greed would be otherworldly. But some benefits, obviously, financially, baseball needs to happen this year for their own financials. Like I said, they're losing over $1 billion a month. There's also the aspect of escapism, of the aspect that sports provide escapism, which is a public service. And that's always been true. I can speak from experience. I'm a Royals fan, but I'm from Houston, and so when the Astros were making that run to the World Series, it's obviously tainted now with the cheating and everything. But when it was happening, that was a huge relief for, I mean, me and for so many of my friends because of Hurricane Harvey that year. It was something that people could like use to distract themselves from how horrible some of the things were in their lives. And if baseball was able to come back this year and do that for something as wide scale as a international pandemic, that would be a huge win. There's also the idea that baseball could set an example for other leagues to come back. We've kind of seen the KBO, the Korea Baseball Organization, do this because they've been able to come back with no fans due to the public health situation in South Korea. And so if baseball is able to come back, they might be able to set an example for hockey or basketball. And so opportunity costs, depending on the decided solution, they could potentially be leaving money on the table if they decide to come back too soon. There's a question of, if you wait longer, will fans be able to come? Because you'll get a lot more revenue if fans are able to come and buy tickets, first of all, and then also buy concessions and everything else in the stadium. There's also kind of the idea that each plan here acts as an opportunity cost for the other one. So if you do the 3-division plan, then, the Arizona idea is lost and you won't know whether or not that could have worked out better. The next stage of this that I wanted to apply to things we've learned this semester, and I think this is like one of the most important questions they're facing, is the ethics of it. So any return to baseball needs to be ethically sound. First of all, how do you come back without a vaccine? Can you do that safely? There's a lot of factors at play, though, in this ethical question. We talked about sports as a public service already, so there's the idea that coming back is good, just because of how beneficial it would be for American mental health. But you're also asking people to put themselves and their families at risk, like I said, and there will be pressure from people who think that these players are in peak physical condition, they're not more at risk or high risk. But there's also going to be people who think they shouldn't have to come back at all, and so the pressure on them will be immense the other way as well. So then what policies must be in place to make these things as safe as possible? And is as safe as possible safe enough to return? And obviously the biggest question is, what if a player tests positive? So this week, Adam Silver said about the NBA that a return to basketball would require daily testing. And so if a player tests positive, they would be quarantined. Is that what baseball does, or are they going to be in that position yet? So if you'll pause the video now and leave comments about what you think of the ethics of this, if you have any ideas for a plan that you think would work, maybe some other barriers or benefits or opportunity costs that I missed, but really just what do you think about all this? What do you think could work, and is it ethical to try to come back? Okay, so now coming back, here's my take on it. I think the Arizona plan is really unlikely to be agreed to by players, as well as any plan requiring hubs like the Arizona, Florida, Texas idea too. Because more than just Mike Trout and Clayton Kershaw will have problems with it. Because players, if you're asking them to take on this risk and also be apart from their families, that's just a devastating thing. That's tough. These players are human beings with relationships and loved ones, as well as being peak athletes. So that's going to weigh really heavily in their mind. I think that the 3-division plan could work, but I have doubts about playing it in home stadiums because of the logistics of that. What happens if there's an outbreak in Chicago, and now the Cubs and White Sox are both way more at risk? Can you travel there? Can they travel out of Chicago? There's also the politics side of it. Illinois is staying closed for longer. California is staying closed for longer. So you've got the Dodgers, Angels, A's, Giants, all those teams in California are going to have trouble opening their stadiums back up. But this plan does appeal much more to the players. So I think if they can figure out a way to do it, it probably makes sense. I also think the latest proposal makes sense in terms of the timeline, the mid-June return to training and then early July return to the season. But it requires things to move at a very optimistic rate, I think. One thing really quick, I think that no matter what, the attitude towards sports this year is going to be different than it ever has been. I talked about public service and how that affected me and my loved ones in Houston. But I think, like I said, that's going to be just so dramatically increased this year if people can have something to attach to and be passionate about. That even if it's just for a brief moment, makes them forget about the difficulties they're facing. And something that's much less significant or much less important, I guess, um, uh, is like the historical comparisons. I think it'll be really interesting if we do this like 3 division plan or something to compare. The playoffs are going to look different. So how are you going to compare that to past seasons? How are you going to like adjust for stats if you're only able to play 9 other teams? I just think all that's going to be really interesting. But that's kind of the baseball nerd in me jumping out. But also the historical significance of coming back first and giving people something to look forward to during coronavirus is going to be huge. Like I said, continue the conversation in the comments. Here's a list of sources. Huge props to Ken Rosenthal at The Athletic and Jeff Passan at ESPN because they've been reporting on this stuff for a long time. Thank you.